All right, welcome back. I'm here today with Niall and Kevin of the Subrosa Group, which is a international security company focused on real assets and the maritime sector. And Niall and Kevin, thank you for joining me here today.
You're welcome, Charles.
Welcome.
Right. So now you both have long backgrounds of military service and Her Majesty. It's tough as an American to say that, but Her Majesty's Royal Marines and the Special Forces, and now focus on a lot of the issues globally that target a lot of the assets that in the maritime and commodity sector that we need to support our industries. Now maybe can you give us a quick overview of how the Subrosa Group came to be?
Yeah, no problems, Charles, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. So, as you mentioned, my background is Royal Marines. So I joined when I was about 20, but previous to that, I was actually in the Territorial Army with the SES up in Hereford. So I had a Special Forces background, although it was what would be equivalent to the National Guard, the Territorial Army. And I joined the Royal Marines at about 2021, which is slightly older than normal guys join. They joined at 16, 17. And then I had about 7.5 years in the Royal Marines and then got injured out in about 1996. So the first couple of years I was at 40 Commando, and then I went down to the Special Boat Service as a Special Forces communicator. And predominantly most of my time with the Special Boat Service as a comms guy, I was with the Maritime Counter-Terrorism part of the SBS. So without going into too much detail, obviously being involved in protecting UK assets from terrorism, whether that be the QE2 or oil fields, oil rigs up in the North Sea. Did that for about 5 years, unfortunately got injured out. And then I went straight from the Royal Marines and worked for the Brunel Royal Family as a close protection officer, as a bodyguard. And this was before the industry was regulated in the UK, the security industry. So it was quite challenging coming from a Royal Marines Special Forces type background where you were working with good operators going into an industry which is unregulated and anybody could call themselves a security consultant, a bodyguard, a close protection officer.
Yeah.
So I found that quite challenging. And then kind of decided early on, you either do something about that or you just shut up and ride the waves, basically. And unfortunately, I'm not the sort of person that shuts up and ride the waves. So I did something about it. So I started up originally a security company myself. And in the time in the UK, this was pre-Afghanistan, pre-Iraq, it was very much centered around Middle Eastern clients coming into London for the summer period and providing close protection and security. And then in the winter months, we used to go and do covert surveillance for insurance fraud and things like that. So a colleague that I'd met in the Marines at Hereford, in the SES, he was a Royal Marine. He'd left before me and set up an investigations company. So after me subcontracting work to him and him subcontracting work to me, we decided to join forces and set up what was originally Subrosa Group. And pretty much haven't looked back from then, really. So although we come across predominantly as a security company, we are really the business risk management, intelligence and security, specialized security. So we do corporate investigations, covert surveillance, we do CCTV, we do cyber security, security audits, security reviews, and that could be of a ship, of a building, of a company, of a business. It could be all its assets across the globe, wherever that might be. So that could be a mining asset in Zambia. It could be a pharmaceutical asset in Switzerland. And what we do is look at risk. So most of our work, if not all of our work, starts from a risk assessment. What's the likelihood of something happening? What's the impact if that happens? And what are the vulnerabilities? And then we come in and design control measures to reduce.
Yeah, there's so many different risks in the world today, from obviously in Africa, a lot of the mines, there's, local militias, and in the Red Sea now we have, armed nation states essentially attacking vessels. Piracy is back. Cyber warfare against vessels is on the uptick. So it seems like there's plenty to go around to keep you guys busy at the moment.
Yeah, and we've got to look at all those risks. We've got to look at all those risks. So risk assessments are very comprehensive because an asset could have internal external risk from organized crime, external risk from terrorism, external risk from nation states trying to get information. So yeah, there are a lot of risks to consider, and that's why risk assessment is really important and getting it all mapped out in a proper risk assessment with the control measures. The way we've set up Subrosa Group, we've got SRG Security, which is a security guarding division. SRG Special Projects, where Kevin and I really sit. It's that kind of I hate to say it, that kind of James Bond, MI5, MI6, SBS, SAS, all those specialist police officers sort of sit in that special projects division where we do the security audits, the security reviews, the risk assessments, and come up with the control measures. And then we've got SRG Technical and Cyber Security, which looks after CCTV, access control, physical security, gates, barriers, ballistic doors, the whole remit. And then we've got Subrosa Group International, which sits in Ireland, which looks after all our international clients. And the recently started SRG Maritime Security. We've been providing maritime security for a number of years, but what we've decided to do was set up a specific maritime security company. And Kevin will explain some of the reasons and some of the accreditations we've had to get to do that, because we believe the piracy problem is not going to go away in a week or two. This is here to stay. As you said rightly so, this isn't just about Somali pirates anymore. This is a lot more complex than that, with a lot more different types of weapons being used, whether it's aerial drones, underwater drones, whether it's cyber threats, whether it's pirates on skiffs with AK-47s. The risk picture has changed, and so has the area of operations. So looking at what's happening, we decided to rather than historically we would have run those tasks through special projects, we said no, this is actually worth setting up a specific business for this. So that's what we've done in the last few months, really, and hence the sort of the profile being right, being sort of out there about the new division which set up. But Kevin's a Royal Marine, I'm a Royal Marine. Maritime security is our background; it's in our blood. And Kevin can come on to his maritime experience in a moment, plus his Royal Marines experience. So we've been in business 20 years. We're tried and tested. We've had clients for some of those 17, 18 years. So I'm sure Charles, a lot of security companies come and they go. Anybody who leaves the military believes they can set up a security company and they can call themselves a security consultant, but we are tried and tested. We've been in the field 20 plus years. We've deployed in various places around the world. I've spent 4 years in Saudi Arabia, 3 years in Afghanistan, some time in Iraq, and then quite a bit of time in the Middle East, Africa and Asia. So we are a truly international business, and Kevin will come on to his international experience as well.
Yeah.
So that's a very quick, brief overview of Subrosa Group, how we started and who we are, basically.
Yeah, it's a robust platform for what is a very complex industry. I'd be curious, over the, cyber security now is really front and center. How have you seen the increase in companies paying attention to the cyber security aspect of their businesses over, call it, the last, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, cybersecurity is no different from any other security, unfortunately, Charles. It should be, but what tends to happen is people are very reactive rather than proactive. When we all know, in reality, being proactive will probably save you a lot of money down the line being reactive.
Yeah.
So I think because of what's happened in the cybersecurity space, you had some very big entities that have been hit with cyber attacks and denial of service. I think people realise now that it's not about the size of the business. Anybody can be subject to a cyber attack. I'm not sure if you're aware of in the UK now that the UK government is specifying that certain camera companies cannot be used anymore, deployed on certain buildings, so they have to be NDAA compliant. So
Okay,
again,
interesting.
that's so Chinese-based cameras. So prior to that, police stations, magistrates' courts, all kinds of government buildings had a lot of Hikvision cameras, for example, on them. And there was concern that the Chinese government might have had some way of collecting data. So in the last 4 or 5 years, yeah, there's definitely been a switch on where you can procure your IT cyber security equipment from, because of that sort of interest from state nations capturing data. And we all know that data is valuable now, and really, if you've got somebody's data, how important that is. So I think the switch is that they realise now that there's other ways of capturing data rather than just a hack. It could be gathering data through a camera system or through something else, and that's being closed down quite strongly in the UK, actually. I mean, even commercial businesses now who've got government contracts are asking for NDAA compliant equipment.
Yeah, interesting.
I
Yeah, in
think,
the US, we've had a big debate. A lot
yeah,
of the gantry cranes in ports are manufactured in China, and
yeah,
there's a push within government to better understand some of the risks that are involved from potentially having equipment inside of cranes that can track or alter movements in port and whatnot. So it's really everything and anything is a target now. I mean, we had
yeah,
the recently, I don't know if you guys were following it, but the vessel collision in Baltimore here
yeah,
in the US, and a lot of discussion about what could have caused some of that, something like that. Personally, I think it was a bit of a freak accident, but there are situations now where you could potentially start seeing more asymmetric warfare against maritime equipment and everything. So yeah, Kevin, it'd be great to hear. So you've been tasked with standing up the maritime division. Unfortunately, maritime is usually farther down on the list of things that
Um,
people spend attention and care about. So
yeah, good afternoon, Charles, and thanks for hosting us. The maritime security world is coming alive again at the moment. It went through a phase, the Gulf of Aden or the Gulf of Guinea, which is the west of Africa, where it was all in the news on the back of Captain Phillips and the vessel there being taken. We've all seen the Tom Hanks film.
yeah,
All that sort of thing was going on a constant basis. I'm not sure you're aware, this week in the news, a ransom was paid for a vessel in the region of $5 million. Now, for the ship owners and for the crew members, they probably think, right, we get the hull back, we get our property back, our crew are safe, no problem. But does then that subsequently proliferate further attacks? Because they've got to be successful once. $5 million is a lot of money. That enable
yeah,
them to buy more equipment, possibly employ more people or hire more people or get more people involved. But you have to go chasing the money where this money comes from and where they're backed from. Because, you know what, Somalia realistically has been in civil war since, I don't know, early 90s.
yeah.
It's a little bit of a failed state. So who's funding these individuals to have this equipment, to have the capability to to hijack these vessels? Now, obviously, if you move into the Red Sea through the Bab el Mandab and the southern reaches of the Red Sea, there's different actors. And you already pointed out they're state actors, some of them. The Houthis sort of changed the game in January when they landed on that large Ro-Ro car carrier vessel. Because two of the things you would look for in the maritime world with a vessel would be the speed and then the freeboard. So for somebody to get on it from the surface of the sea. And as you can imagine, at a Ro-Ro car carrier, the freeboard's quite high.
Yeah, so
But
pulling a
for
helicopter for that one, that was
Yeah,
pretty
well, and
that
they
was
did.
pretty
So that
insane.
changed the rules.
Mm,
Your risk assessments you had before then are completely out the window. You need to reassess that completely. Because if they're going to land on you, you're not going to outrun a helicopter, and the freeboard doesn't matter, they just land on it. Plus the fact, depending on how many they land, how heavily armed they are, you would have to take in consideration, if you were an operator on that, irrelevant of what your rules for the use of force are, what your SOPs are with regards to engagement, would you really engage that vessel? Sorry, that helicopter that's coming in. Big decisions to be made, and you'd have to make them pretty quickly on the ground. Irrelevant the fact you could, before you deploy, go through some scenario-based questions and discuss it. You on the ground on that vessel would have to make a decision. Right, do I engage that helicopter?
Yeah,
I
if you
think
just
what we
have a
saw,
rifle,
yeah.
that might be a tough task. So how do
Yeah.
Well,
I
what
mean
we
that
saw,
brings
Charles, was one of our clients where historically, because obviously manpower is a cost. So the way we work is our team, our maritime security team, join the ship before it enters the hostile area. They're on the ship for the period it's in the hostile area. Then they deboard basically. So where it would have been a 3-4 man team before, we're now asking for larger teams of 6, 7, 8.
yeah,
A 4-man team shooting at a helicopter is different from an 8-man team shooting at a helicopter, whether you do or not. But so because of again looking at the risk and assessing it, we've now seen where before shipping companies would have asked for a smaller team because it's cheaper. They now realise they have to have a bigger team because of the threat. The threat and the risk has changed. So that's something we've seen since that January attack. Is the size of the teams is increasing as well.
yeah, that's fascinating because yeah, that's something that came up in the Baltimore situation is, well, why don't they have tugboats everywhere? And unfortunately, in the maritime industry, the margins are quite narrow,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if a ship is making a few thousand or $10,000 a day, that can be a healthy economic environment for shipping. And so, if you need 10,000 additional for tugboats, or if you need a few thousand additional for private security individuals, it becomes quite tricky and obvious. But
You have to put into context as well, Charles. If you were to look historically, how many vessels have travelled under that bridge in Baltimore with no problem?
exactly, yeah,
All of a sudden, and if you look at some of the footage I've seen, it looks like there's a complete power loss. Every single light goes out on the vessel.
yeah,
Then there's a big puff of smoke from the funnel, so it looks like the engine's trying to restart or something. If you're doing 6-7 knots, that vessel weighs 200,000 tons. It doesn't stop traveling forward. So
exactly,
it's
yeah,
it's a three-dimensional environment with a vessel at sea. People need to understand that it's not like a car. But at sea it keeps going. It will also move with the tide, with the sea, etc.
Yeah.
So it's extremely complicated. I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm probably the same belief as you, Charles. I think it's just a tragic accident.
yeah. So
Yeah.
when you guys it seems like the Somali pirates have potentially they've received some new funding sources, but it seems like they've come back into the picture a bit with a spike now in activity off of Somalia. How is that? How are you guys looking at that? Has the risk assessment there really changed in terms of how you're handling the situation? Maybe just give me a quick overview on,
Um,
when a shipping company calls up and says, "Hey, we've got to go past Somalia." What's the process and rundown look like
Well,
today?
it depends. They need to board a team or board some people outside the high risk area. Um, Ideally, they've got some materials on board the vessel that you can harden it with. So some barbed wire. They can lock certain doors, external doors. So if people do get on the vessel, they can't get into the infrastructure. It depends what sort of speed they're doing. I've done previous transits on LNG vessels. And LNG vessels are freeboard at the stern is 9 meters. So they're going to have to work hard to get on that. And they'll do 22, 23 knots.
Yeah,
Now, if you're doing a slower speed, you need to take that consideration. Maybe where the Horn of Africa in that area, you look at local intelligence so that you can go to UK MTO, Maritime Trade Organization based out of Dubai. There's MOSCHOA, which is the Maritime Security Centre of the Horn of Africa. There's various intelligence sources, and they're open source intelligence. You can get various bits of information. You can speak to generally other people that we know, operators that work for us. they will understand the concept of what is happening. The risk assessment will be based on the vessel, the size, the cargo. There's lots of different things that you'll take into consideration. But they'll come to us. Generally, we will have a conversation with them about what they need and what they. Sometimes that conversation, because of commercial reasons, we may have to come to a compromise. But we won't compromise. Right, we just don't think that is safe no matter what, so we just won't do it. And that's some of the problem. At times it's extremely difficult. I understand it's an additional commercial cost for the shipping company, but they need to be safe. I mean, I don't know many shipping companies that are using the Red Sea at the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. So
because
that's
of the
probably
risk.
impacted,
Yeah.
because the reason people kind of needed the Somali protection was because they were going through the Red Sea, and then that
Yeah.
was just an extension of that. Now that the
Yeah.
Red Sea is essentially closed for
Yeah.
Western-owned vessels, there is
Yeah.
still some Russian and Chinese activity. That has rerouted traffic patterns. So Somalia, so it's been interesting to see Somalia pick up, given a lot of folks aren't operating in that area.
Yeah, well, the Houthis have stated that whilst their area of operations have really been around the southwest coast of Yemen, they've talked about pushing that area of operations further into the Indian Ocean.
Yeah. You saw
because
some long distance kind of drone attacks on vessels.
Yeah,
A
and
thousand
again,
miles at sea or something.
yeah, a drone attack, and we all know the state actors that are in, who are pushing these drones towards Yemen to let the Houthis use them. It's difficult thing to, a commercial vessel is not set up to have air defense on it. To counter a drone that's possibly approaching you at 100, 200 knots, a commercial vessel is just not set up for that. So
one of the things to consider as well, if you haven't got security on, the vessel has to go full speed.
Yeah.
If you have got security on, you can reduce the speed a little bit, so you are saving money
Fuel
rather than
costs.
going through
That's
full
true.
speed.
And the bunker fuel curves are essentially exponential, where
Yeah.
that last few knots of speed, you might even double your fuel consumption. So that's insightful.
Yeah, so putting an armed security team on gives you the safety that you don't have to be going at full speed in that particular area. You can reduce your speed down a little bit because you've got an armed security team providing protection. The money it saves on fuel is offsetting the cost of the security team. So
I mean,
so what is the average number of security members that you guys say that you would estimate you have deployed at the moment per vessel?
Between 4 and 6 generally.
Well, 4 and 6. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, some of the bigger vessels like an LNG carrier normally look for an 8-man team. There's logistics have to be considered as well, real estate. So, for example, where are these? You know yourself, Charles, something like a VLCC, which is the size of 3 or 4 football fields, has a crew of 25 people to look after it.
Yeah.
Now, the infrastructure may not have 8 spare beds. They're going to have to be accommodated. They've got to be fed. They've got to be watered, etc., etc. So that's an extra burden on the skipper on the vessel anyway. The captain overall retains control. The security officers on board and the maritime security team leader will answer to the captain of the vessel anyway. But it's a close teamwork collaboration between all elements. I worked on vessels before, and as soon as you get on, you can see some of the crew members, their attitude changes, as in they're a little bit more or happier, content, and because they're mariners, they don't want to be in gunfights and arguments. They want to go to work on their vessel, do what they do, then go home safely at the end of however long their deployment is. They don't want to be involved in this. This is things outside their control that they don't really want to be involved in. But unfortunately, in the modern world we live in, people love to argue, don't we?
We've got other skill sets as well we can bring to bear. We've got first aid skill sets as well, and firefighting skill sets. I don't know, Kevin Woods have mentioned of the training the guys going through the SCTW and stuff. So
all the security operators or maritime security officers, we call them, will have done a recognised MSO course, maritime security officer course. They will do, there's 4 elements of the STCW, which is Standards of Training and Certified Watchkeeping, which effectively makes them safe to operate on board a vessel. They understand how the vessel operates. They'll have first aid courses. They'll all have weapon handling skills. They will have recently had a range day, so they've got an in-date validation with regards to shooting the weapons they're operating. Lots of different things. You know, they've got medical qualifications. So they'll basically enhance the capability of the crew in some ways, but without getting in the way of the crew, because they have still got tasks to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
And then do you guys get much support from governmental groups as you put a team on board a vessel and you're transiting a region? Essentially in some of these places, you're kind of in no man's land, but I'm sure there's, various support functions through governmental entities.
It really depends. I mean, a lot of the time previously, when in the Gulf of Aden, because the vessels you need flag state permission to carry weapons on the vessel anyway. So if the flag state gives permission, no problem. You're going to have to jump through a few hoops, make sure you've got the correct insurances in place, everything's certified. But it's where you board that vessel with those weapons. A classic example in Fujairah, in the UAE, which if you strategic or geographically, you know where Fujairah is.
Yeah.
If you keep going sort of northeast, you'll hit a country that starts with I and ends in N and it's got 2 other letters in it. Now they used to be off there.
Starting with I, there's a few of those, but
yeah. But there used to be what we would call floating armories. So they keep weapons on these vessels, and that's where you'll go pick your kit and equipment up from, board the vessel, and go round to another floating armory, wherever that may be. There is sort of, if you like, some host nation support with regards to those. But also you get people who won't operate within the rules of the host nation. So therefore things get very difficult and very awkward. You've got to, everybody needs to be on side. It's no good trying to go through customs with, a long rifle in your bag. Oh, it's not mine, sort of thing. You've got to be open and honest. They've got to understand it. You've got to have all the correct permits, all the correct authority to allow you to be able to move around with what you need to move around with. It's the industry as such, sort of the heyday, if you like, from 2008 through to 2015, and I'm talking specifically in the Gulf of Aden. The Gulf of Guinea in West Africa is still very volatile now, but the people who conduct acts of piracy operate in a different manner. They really want to steal your cargo and throw you overboard. That's what they'll do. Whereas in the Gulf of Aden, they want to steal you and the vessel and then ask for, and I'm specifically talking about Somali pirates. I'm not talking about the Houthis, what they would do. That'll be a little bit different. I wouldn't want to be.
The US entity used to report into Kev.
Muschoa, the Maritime Security Centre, Horn of Africa, MSC HOA. Yeah. And again, you can report into them. Again, people, when there's a naval task group in that area, people imagine, yeah, that's great, all sorted. The Indian Ocean is a vast area. Even if you've got a vessel that'll do 25 knots, that's 25 nautical miles. That's an hour to get to you. They can do what they want to do in an hour. You need to protect yourself. And even if you've got a helicopter on board your vessel, that helicopter's only got a certain range because it's got to go out. It's got to have the fuel on board to get back because it definitely doesn't want to ditch.
So we do have comms directly into the government armadas, the French, the British, the US. You can report into them. You can ask them for assistance. But it really, as Kevin said, it depends where you are.
Yeah.
You might get some pretty quick assistance because you're close, and then the military or the Navy will take whichever Navy it is or that. So we do have comms, we have satellite comms, we have HF comms, we have all the comms we need to speak to those entities, and we can report into those and get live intelligence updates, etc., etc. So that's part of our SOP.
Given the types of risk that exist, clearly, when some ragtag Somali pirates are approaching your vessel in a skiff and maybe they have some AK-47s or maybe a rocket launcher, it's the decision to fire at that vessel seems more straightforward. Clearly, if a kind of a private or paramilitary group comes on a helicopter in the Gulf of Aden or the Arabian Gulf from that I named country, that's a totally different kind of
Yeah,
analysis. So yeah,
yeah.
how do you
I
work
mean,
with the flag state, or is it
yeah,
up to you, or
we
how do you
work with
decide?
when you're in international waters, we work with flag states. They have to agree it, but you've got to also agree rules for the use of force. In the military, you'd call it rules of engagement, but
Yeah,
rules for the use of force, effectively. It can turn into a little bit of a grey area because who controls it? International waters. If you're in territorial waters, different understanding, but if you're in international waters, as long as it's commensurate with the threat and appropriate, it's adequate. The thing is, people think everything's accurate. They believe in Hollywood movies, and one shot with a 9mm pistol will take somebody out about half a mile away. Well, yeah,
right.
okay. And you've got to understand as well, these people bobbing around in skiffs, these little 22, 24-foot wooden boats, shooting an AK, the chance of them having any sort of accurate sustained fire on you is very slim.
Yeah.
Very
I
slim.
think we haven't got general purpose machine guns. We've got self-loading rifles basically. So,
Yeah.
it's very controlled what weapon systems that maritime security can, and that's from the old threat. Maybe that has to be looked at again because of the new threat of helicopters and etc. etc. But
Yeah.
then that's a whole political discussion about
Yeah, these state actors that are,
yeah.
obviously you shouldn't condone them taking vessels, but they're also clearly not, you know, putting the crew in significant risk. They have, they in the Houthis case, they did capture them, and in Iran's case, they've captured some crew members, but they
Yeah.
usually, they're releasing the crew members. They're not holding them essentially
Yeah. I
in
mean, if
great
if you go
danger.
back to 2003, I believe there was some Royal Navy personnel were captured by the Iranian not National Guard. It's called a
Yeah.
something guard, isn't it?
I
Yeah.
don't know if you saw when they got released. They had some very nice suits. That
Yeah.
the Iranians gave them some very nice suits from about the 1960s, I think. But
because they were out in near the vessel, near the Royal Navy vessel, they were out in two ribs. And then the Iranians said, right, you're in our territorial waters. I'm not sure. I can't argue. I wasn't there, but I don't know what was. Effectively, they were captured and taken. They took the ribs. The Navy didn't get the ribs back.
I think if you look at it, it's really threat to life is what we're protecting against. So our rules of engagement are very strict, and they have to be proportionate and appropriate to what the threat and risk is. And it's very clear the rules of engagement. But like I say, that was based on the historical, not the newer threat and risk. That'll have to get looked at in reality, because everybody on the bad side knows what the maritime security can use, because it's in black and white, and it's a rule and it's a law. So it's not hidden or covert. They know exactly what can or cannot be carried at the moment. So they're doing their risk assessment as well, aren't they?
Yeah. So what are the main risks? I mean, obviously, so you have you have West Africa, which has been probably one of the more violent terrorist areas, and then clearly you have the Somali threat, which seems to be on the uptick.
Yeah.
Now you have state actors in the Bab el Mandeb, and then
Yeah.
in the Arabian Gulf. What about over in East Asia, the Straits of Singapore?
Yeah, I mean the Malacca Straits is historically known as places where so-called tradesmen will try and get their way on the vessel and then rob you.
Yeah.
Hold the skipper to ransom and walk me to your safe and give me what cash you've got in your safe, sort of thing.
Are you seeing companies look at security in that region, or is it mostly centered in Africa at the moment?
It's been a historical problem, Charles. It's been there for a long, long time in that area. We've not really had any sort of requests in that area. The main requests we've had at the moment are the Gulf of Guinea, so the West Africa, and then the Gulf of Aden.
Yeah.
I think you've got to look at that whole Asia region as well. There's a lot of other activity going on around Taiwan and Philippines from a certain navy encroaching on people's territories as well. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of other risks involved in those environments. And what you tend to find is if you've got that activity going on, then there's a lot of focus on that. And then your pirates or criminals, your maritime criminals, see the little gaps where they can go in because there's
Yeah,
so much
exactly.
focus. Yeah, so much focus on this happening. It
Yeah.
takes away the focus on them. So
And then now
again,
you had mentioned you had been down in Africa recently. What are some of the hot spots kind of more inland in the mining sector? Or is it generally just every facility has some sort of protection on some sort of level?
yeah, well, obviously Sierra Leone, the Congo, Mali. There's some very interesting places out there at the moment with some interesting. And again, you've got the criminal element, and you've also got the elements creeping out from Syria and Iraq who are now establishing themselves in Africa. So again, you've got, and then you've got always, as always, the intergovernment rivalry in those countries. So they are very complex environments to work in.
Yeah.
And so again, it's down to our risk assessment. You have to look at internal theft, external theft from criminals, external theft from competitors, or external disruption from competitors. So you've got a lot of Chinese mining companies working in Africa. So what might they do? That could be cyber, that could be paying somebody to go and make a machine not work. There's all kinds, and then you've got the sort of political, religious, terrorist type risks as well. But I think you
Yeah.
mentioned at the beginning, the risk picture is, was now that, isn't it? It's getting bigger and bigger because there's lots of different elements now. Internal government issues, external actors from states, organized crime, international organized crime.
Yeah, it's wild. It's and are the most of your employers in Africa, are they private private or public companies that own mines, or is it some governmental entities, or what's the breakdown look like there?
Yeah, so the two companies that we looked at have state police assigned to the mine as well as the private security. So you'll have employed staff, security staff from the mine, and then you have an element of state police assigned to the mine, which the mining company pays for. So what you tend to have is the local security officers might carry a shotgun, for example, but your state police will have an AK-47. So again, the local police, the local security are specific to one type of risk and internal theft, local theft. And then you've got state police with more capable weapon systems against more organized crime, international crime. So it's a partnership really with government, police entities, and private security.
Yeah, well, it's a complex and moving environment. Well, just one last. I know we're kind of reaching close to the end of our time here, but I wanted to ask clearly as the security side of the business, you guys are kind of put at the front edge, if you will, or the front lines of a lot of the geopolitical issues in the world. But I'd just be curious on the maritime front, particularly, you know, what do you guys think governments need to do a better job of to help kind of support the maritime industry, especially when it comes to the piracy in Africa? Clearly, the broader threats from geopolitical state factions are a little bit trickier to deal with. But it does seem like the attacks on vessels in the West and East Africa should be able to be better supported by government. But I'd just be curious if you guys had any ideas or thoughts on how shipping companies, private security, and governments could work better together to kind of address this issue.
If I go first, I'll let Kevin jump in. I think historically, some governments and some government organisations, military police, don't like working with private security.
Yeah.
I think that has to change because you haven't got enough police, military. They're busy as it is with their own day-to-day jobs. There's not enough manpower, so they have to realise that there are professional security companies that they can work with, because basically they were former military or former police. So they're the same people, just in a private capacity. So I think working closer together on tasks, and whether that be sharing intelligence, joint teams. So if a navy hasn't got enough personnel, maybe it should be a joint team, as long as there's clear rules of engagement and clear rules of who's in charge and everything else. But why not do a hybrid team of a navy personnel and a private security? So you are increasing your navy footprint because you've got joint shared teams. I think maybe looking at what weapon systems we can deploy with. We don't want to be carrying extra weapons for the sake of it, but let's look at the risk in reality and say, if we have got helicopters, if that's going to be the more, I think there's been 2 incidents now. What can we use which is acceptable to everybody? So maybe look at the weapon systems we're allowed to use to look at countering the threat. So sharing intelligence, sharing of tasks, and looking at what weapon systems we could. Those would be my three takes, and Kevin might have some of his own.
Just to sort of close on what Niall said as well there, Charles, people need to understand somewhere like 74% of our Earth we live in is covered by the oceans.
Exactly.
I think 85+% of world trade is conducted by sea. Because they don't see it on a day-to-day basis, they don't understand that it's constant. Security and maritime security specifically of the oceans, to allow seafarers to go about their business, to allow shipping companies to move. It has a knock-on effect if they don't secure these places. Vessels at the moment that aren't going through the Bab and going through the Suez Canal, if they're going down around the southern tip of Africa, that's probably adding 10-day transit onto their transit, of 10 days onto their transit to get into the Med. And if that costs you $70,000 a day to run that vessel, that's another 700k.
I think if you look at when the Suez Canal was closed, if you look at the economic disruption that caused, I think you'd probably find people had a look at that and said, well, we hadn't actually thought about doing something in maritime, and look what problems we can cause by disrupting maritime. If you look at that now, I think everybody's looking at the statistics and saying, well, if we can disrupt 20% of 85% of the trade, that's going to have impact somewhere.
I mean, start to see some copycat effect.
I mean, you look at Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, both strategic assets. If you control them, you can control a lot of trade. Because if you look where the Panama Canal is geographically, if you can't go through that to go from the Pacific to the Atlantic, you've got a big old journey ahead of you.
It's crazy. Well, we do appreciate the work that your group and your employees are doing to be on the front lines of this and to support maritime assets globally and to keep seafarers. Unfortunately, seafarers are put in this position, but shipping companies, shipping market participants are definitely thankful for groups like yours that will put themselves in harm's way to help protect people's lives and assets. So it's been great to connect with you guys here today. We look forward to staying in touch as risks change and adapt in the world. But we appreciate you guys taking time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much, Charles.
No problem, Charles. And if any of your viewers just want to have a quick 5-minute chat, there's no problems at all. So we're happy to have initial consultations, initial phone calls, and there's no charge for that, obviously. So we're very happy to talk about issues that people may have on a quick phone call or a Teams call or something. So no problems at all. They can just reach out to us.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Charles.